If you believe the world is made up of atoms and energy, how do you explain truth, or morality, or logic itself? Are those just illusions, or worse, are they meaningless? In this video, we're tackling a classic critique of materialism, that if everything is just matter, then abstract things like truth, morality, and logic shouldn't even exist. So how do we explain that? How do we explain logic, reasoning, morality, and those sorts of things? Do we need God? Or can a materialist worldview, a heathen like myself, make sense without divine backup? Let's look at the challenge from theism. Theists lay this out clearly. They often say that materialists are borrowing capital from religion. They say that if all that exists is physical stuff, atoms, particles, space-time, then where do we get immaterial things like moral truths, logical laws, or even the idea of knowledge itself? After all, logic isn't made of atoms. You can't measure logic. Morality isn't a substance you can weigh. Even the truth of this video can't be bottled and put up on a shelf, so to speak. The claim is this then: if you're a materialist, you can't justify these things. You're using tools that your worldview cannot explain. So, and you'll often get unfavorably gish-galloped if you try and bring this up in a Discord theist chat. They'll say that you can't even argue. You have no grounds to even make an argument. Sounds like a pretty big problem then if you take the theists at their word, right? But let's take a closer look. Here's the core of my worldview. Concepts like truth, morality, logic are not things that exist independently out in the universe. They are descriptions, tools, maps we've created to navigate the real, physical territory. So let's make the real with some examples here. Example 1 is numbers. 5 apples. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 apples. What's real in this scenario? Well, the apples are real. But 5 is just a way we describe how many of these apples there are. 5 doesn't exist floating somewhere in the cosmos. It's a label for a pattern in the world. Now, there is a sort of worldview that 5 actually does exist somewhere out in the cosmos. That's from Plato. And that's also what theists are trying to come up with and espouse today in their own viewpoints. Here's another example, though. Gravity. A rock falls off a cliff. You say the law of gravity made it fall. But gravity isn't a thing you can touch. It's a framework, a law that describes a constant pattern of how mass behaves. The falling is real. The law of gravity, it's the map we use to explain what's going on. Just because something is useful doesn't mean it's real. Useful fiction doesn't mean false. It means it helps us make sense of what is. And the clincher is this: theists also rely on axioms. Their starting point is usually God exists, and from there everything else also flows. But they can't prove that axiom any more than a materialist like myself can prove that the material world exists outside of our minds. In that sense, both worldviews rely on unprovable assumptions. The difference is that my materialist worldview doesn't add unnecessary metaphysical baggage. I start from what I know. The world appears physical, observable, consistent, and I build from there, using concepts that help me navigate reality, without mistaking the concepts for the reality itself. Don't mistake the map for the territory. So let's look at some objections then. One objection is that without absolute truth, then how do you even justify knowledge? And the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear this is, who says we need absolute truth? Science and knowledge don't demand perfection. In fact, they demand just usefulness, repeatability, evidence. If a theory helps us get to the moon or advance technology, it's working just fine without any sort of guarantees underneath it. And when it stops working, that's when we refine our hypotheses. That's when we run more tests. That's when we learn more. The great thing about testability is that we can be wrong and then learn why we were wrong and refine the frameworks we use to understand the world around us. We don't claim that we could even ever grasp some sort of absolute truth because it's arrogant to assume that anyone can. Another objection here is from going to this thing of saying everything is either material or is a useful fiction, that we're undermining logic. Not at all. I'm using logic as a tool. Just like a compass doesn't exist as a natural law, or a map doesn't exist somewhere naturally in the world, you would agree too, right? Any other theist would agree that you can't find maps without the humans making them. You can't find compasses without the humans making them, right? These aren't things that naturally occur. We know that they're just fictions in the sense that they describe something, but it works to guide us north or wherever you want to on the map. It doesn't make it meaningless, it makes it effective. You can think of fiat currency in the same way. The majority of the world uses fiat currency, the US dollar, right? The Japanese yen, the euro in Europe, right? There's any number of currencies that aren't literally real, right? If you look at it, the reason a dollar is because we say it is. The reason, a gallon of milk is a gallon of milk and it costs X amount of dollars is because we say it is, and market pressures and whatever. But this is all ultimately not anything that really exists, right? They're just atoms in some other formation, but we're saying that it has this monetary value because it's useful to us. And then here's another objection, and you get this when you talk with the transcendental argument for God or presuppositional types, when they're really just pushing you down to the base of your worldview. Some might say that materialism is just as absurd as solipsism. And if you're familiar, just a refresher, the idea of solipsism is essentially that you are the only thing that exists in the universe, and everything is just a figment of your imagination. Think the Matrix, right? Think you're a brain in a vat and everything is a simulation. It's similar to also last Thursdayism, the idea that the whole universe was created last Thursday. And the reason that this idea even exists is because, well, you can't disprove it, right? Well, we could say, well, I remember from things from 2 weeks ago. No. Those were memories created in the span from last Thursday. Nothing actually happened before last Thursday. Everything was created last Thursday, and everything that seems to have been created before last Thursday are just artificial memories and created in your own mind. So these sort of ideas, solipsism, brain and evatism, last Thursdayism, they're arguments to say, well, materialism is just as silly as these. How do I respond? The point is, though, with solipsism and those ideas is that they say nothing is real, though. Materialism says quite the opposite. We'll treat what we can observe and test as provisionally real, right, and go from there. There's a difference between embracing absurdity and confronting it honestly. Frankly, once you get to this bottom thing of what everybody calls a worldview, I think we're all just kind of in a free-for-all brawl at that point. We don't actually have any sense as to what's a more true worldview than anybody else's. So why do I choose a materialist worldview over another one? It's because it's pragmatic. It's pragmatic. Even if everything is a simulation, even if everything was created last Thursday, I am just a brain in a vat. Even if there was a God, so to speak, it still benefits me to live as though the universe exists, I can make observations about it, and this material world is all that we can observe. And every description we come up with it are useful fictions we have to understand it better. An interesting point, too, is that everybody is a materialist in a sense. Even if a Christian theist, for example, says that, no, they believe in these ideas like absolute truth or absolute morality, which is necessary from a God. Okay, but in the day-to-day, they're still going to exchange money that they know isn't real, but represents some idea. They're still going to measure physical weights of items and understand, okay, I have this many grams of coffee, let's make a cup. Because we understand that to exist in the day-to-day, we have to use this idea of empiricism, right? We have to assume the world around us is real. Now, what is the grounding of that? That's where I'll have a disagreement with theists. I'll have a disagreement with non-materialists. But the fact is, we still use the premises in every aspect of our life. Pretty much everybody does. We need to test and have consistently verifiable evidence to say things are true. Everything on top of that are the frameworks we use to get there. So here's the truth, at least from my side of the fence. We humans invent concepts like morality and logic not because they float somewhere in the ether, but because we needed them to survive, to think, to live together. They're maps. And good maps help you get where you're going, even if they're not the territory itself. Materialism is not about denying meaning. It's about understanding where meaning comes from. Not from beyond the universe, but from right in front of us. The universe we can observe itself. And I'd argue that's far more honest. And in a sense, far more empowering. So if this helped challenge your thinking or helped clarify it, then hit subscribe. This channel is all about asking hard questions without pretending that we've got all the answers. I'm Forever Sophist. I'll see you in the next video.